Not going to talk to you about Rust or C++. Hey, that's right. So I'm the diversity hire, I guess, in that respect. As you said, I've any of you who bothered to read Overload all the way to the very end, I'm the person that basically evens the pages out by providing something to put on the inside back cover. I usually write some irreverent nonsense. Unfortunately, that is me. I did do C++ for a very long time, but other stuff now. I come to talk to you about programming kind of in groups. But before we kind of get into the sort of whys and wherefores, I think there's a reason why people or teams generally kind of don't consider the approach of pairing and ensemble programming. And so I kind of wanted to go into the reasons why you kind of might want to adopt it, because it's understanding the way that we kind of work is a key part of why people, some teams are quite fastidious about it, and I guess other people have never sort of tried it. Essentially, this the problem, I guess, is this idea of kind of productivity, and some companies who have this crazy idea about personal productivity being a really important thing. For me, that's kind of the elephant in the room. So let me start with something that at least some of you, it's a bit more kind of low level. When I first heard about pair programming, and I remember chatting about it at the ACCU conference a long time ago. Pete, I think Pete lives here. He was here somewhere. We ended up chatting in the bar about it, and we ended up trying to talk about what we thought it might be. And I remember sort of at the time, symmetric multiprocessing was becoming a thing on the desktop and stuff. This whole idea of, hey, you can have two CPUs, or like two people, two programmers. Is that like having two CPUs? And how does that kind of work? How do you have two people like working on one task? That's like mind-bending. And one of the weird things I kind of brought up, I remember we were chatting about it, was saying, but when you add another CPU, you actually don't get like 100% of that, at least not unless it's a trivially parallelizable problem. You probably only get like 60% of that. And the reason for that is because of all the coordination and communication overhead. I didn't realize at the time, but actually wasn't very far from the truth around kind of software and delivery and that and how that will become more apparent as we kind of go on. So one of the things quite recently which has come up is a company called McKinsey wrote this report, because they were saying, we can measure productivity. In fact, we'll tell you how it's done. So I duly kind of read their report because I wanted to understand a bit more about how they felt software should be delivered. And my immediate reaction was to this part of the graph, their little diagram that they drew. And it was this kind of like this inner loop, which I've called the McKinsey loop, which is this basically loop where you basically sit there at your keyboard, hammering away like frantically, basically trying to churn code out. And what's sort of outside of it is this idea of kind of meetings and things. And it was interesting that like the word collaboration was almost not mentioned anywhere in the document at all. So really kind of reinforced that idea that actually it's just a bunch of monkeys kind of sitting there bashing away at their keyboards and doing their kind of own thing? And where's that sort of kind of, because that's not my experience of the way that high-performing teams work. So I don't think that's kind of helped things. That's helped managers maybe by some tooling and stuff, but I don't necessarily think it's helped software teams understand more about the problems that we kind of face. So I want to kind of wind even further kind of back to the mist of time. So Peter Drucker came up in the 60s. He had this famous phrase of "you can't manage what you can't measure," and he kind of almost kicked off this idea of thoughts around productivity. He also invented the term knowledge work as well, interestingly enough. And then you kind of fast forward into the 90s, and Tom Gilb, who has made many appearances at ACCU Cambridge, at the ACCU conference, and is a man who likes to talk about quantifying stuff. He even quantified love and music, I think, in two different things. And but this quote in Peopleware, which is a really good book, still really good today. Anything you need to quantify can be measured in some way that is superior to not measuring it at all. And his particular choice of how he measured love and how he measured music, you may disagree with the way he did it, but the point was he managed to come up with some way. And then the idea was that you can then take that forward and go, okay, well, how do we come up with something kind of useful? So often I think a lot of these two expressions that are used by managers are kind of misunderstood. And so we end up with this focus on measuring really stupid things. And here's a list of like really stupid things that people like to kind of measure and to define productivity of us as programmers. See, lines of code or number of functions. That's quite a nice, easy one to measure. GIF even gives you little counts of number of lines added and deleted. And then commits and pull requests. It's kind of, I guess, that's a little bit more modern view of it. And bugs fixed or tickets closed. And my particular favourite one at the end, which is about hours worked. The number of hours you spent in your office at your seat is clearly a good indication of how productive you have been. Just winding back to the bugs fixed one, I was working at a team some years ago, and we were working in kind of as a group style. And a couple of months into the engagement, there was an awkward conversation with the client liaison, and the team was suggesting that I should be removed from the team because I was unproductive. And we all found this very confusing. So we had a conversation with the client liaison. I said, well, he's been at every stand-up. He talks about what he's doing. He's written pretty much all the documentation. I'm on a whole bunch of commits. I helped the test team come up with a DSL for doing the front-end testing. Like, how can he seem as unproductive? And it turned out there was another person who was a manager who wasn't part of our team or even the client's team, but he sat in a room and he produced productivity reports. And his report was based on the number of JIRA tickets that were closed. And so each of the members of our team was measured basically on the number of tickets. And because we were programming a group, funny enough, we just arbitrarily picked somebody to put on the ticket. And JIRA at the time didn't allow you to have more than one person. And I just didn't put myself on enough tickets. So that was entirely it. There was no view of what actually I'd contributed. It was just about bugs fixed. So if you've been to any kind of tech conference, and certainly if you come to any agile conference, this is pretty much kind of ingrained in people's heads, which is Goodhart's law about measures becoming targets and ceasing to be good measures. Basically people will game the system. What did we do for the tickets? Well, basically, we just round robin adding ourselves to tickets. So they had no idea actually how much time as people spent, but ultimately we just wanted to keep them happy, kept the report happy. We kind of carry on. We work the way we want to work. So if those aren't particularly good measurements, then what about things that, how do we think about productivity in kind of programming? If I'm talking to kind of clients, then I like to present this phrase, one of the items from the Agile Manifesto, this idea about working software being the primary measure of progress. Ultimately, whether we're actually doing stuff that is useful is kind of the most important thing, not number of lines of code, bugs fixed. So ultimately, it's all about the outcomes. Are we building stuff that our customer wants? Are we satisfying their kind of like needs? And ultimately, we'll kind of need to work back from that. Do you really want to know about whether we're productive, whether we're satisfying their needs quickly enough or we're producing enough stuff? That is something that we would work back from. But ultimately, we have to start at the end of the pipeline and kind of get back. So in more recent times, there's a great book called Accelerate, and Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble, they did some like proper scientific studies and researches and analysis of whole bunches of companies and said, let's look at those companies that are kind of hyper-productive or delivering well, and let's kind of work out what it is that they do that perhaps does describe what it is, or at least give us that working back from those kind of outcomes. So one of the first things these are the four kind of key things that they came up with. So mean lead time for changes. How quickly can we get a change from a customer asking for something to that being written, tested, into production, and then basically making use of it? So basically, how quickly can we get each feature through the pipeline out the other end so that they get their return on investment as fast as possible? Kind of led to that is, or related to that, is deployment frequency. So the number of times the whatever it is that you're publishing is released to end user customers. That tends to be incredibly high in the cases of teams that are very productive. And then, obviously, it's all very good throwing stuff out there into customers, but it's no good if actually we end up causing them more harm than good. So we need to keep an eye about sort of change failure rates. How often do we deploy something and it kind of goes horribly wrong? And we need to do something about it. And then kind of like what sort of brings that all the way back to the beginning again is the mean time to recover. So when we do mess up, basically how quickly can we fix it, get that out? Obviously, the first one and the last one are kind of similar. If you can get a new feature into production really quickly, that also means that you can probably deploy a fix really quickly, which basically kind of is sort of, enforcing. And so if you kind of focus on these things, you might want to ask, what is it that enables these things to happen? What are the practices that the team needs to do to try and keep these things up? And that's basically where we'll kind of like go next. So what we're talking about here is a long game as well. We're not talking about like, when we think about these practices, we often tend to focus on it. You might want to try it for 5 minutes. Oh, it didn't really work. Maybe you tried it for a week. But actually, software delivery generally isn't short. It's not sprints. It's like they're marathons, ultra marathons even, and then some. I've definitely worked on code bases that have been 10, 15 years, and even worked on greenfield projects that are still well going. They're into their like 10 years. So this is a long game. This is about dealing with complexity over time and basically keeping entropy kind of under control. And the practices that we do, that's the thing that we're kind of trying to minimize. So yeah, one moment when I didn't actually tweet a pun is this one. Actually, it was more of a rant really, because somebody was talking about certain practices we'd adopted in the team, and that they were focused on what was happening in the next day or two, trying to convey to them that what we were doing was actually about what's going to happen in a week or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months' time. That's the time when we'll really start to notice. There's this common thing about Agile or TDD making you faster, and it's like not going to make you faster in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but ultimately over time it will do. But it's a kind of a long game. Somebody who's written about it and knows way more than I do about it is this idea of Gore's law. This a complex system that invariably works is found to evolve from a simple system. So again, this idea of kind of keeping complexity under control and keeping sort of entropy down in a system. That's the thing. To start off with something small and kind of like evolve it, and that's the best way to kind of get there. So the ideas of emergent design, which is great from a design perspective, but that also needs to be applied to the team and the team's understanding and kind of the way that the team works. People need to understand and manage that complexity as it grows and find a way for the team to cope with it. Another kind of related book and a related idea came from Goldratt in the 80s. This is unusually, it's written as a novel, which was quite novel. And there's a more modern one called The Phoenix Project, which you might have read, which is like a kind of the IT version. But I had already read the original one, and it's quite, I think it's quite a nice story. One of the things he kind of brings up is this idea of kind of efficiency and kind of flow. This idea that if all our programmers are working at 100% efficiency, that means that clearly they must be working as efficiently and being as productive as possible. So even though we're all throwing branches in and we're all submitting pull-in requests left, right, and centre, clearly that makes us productive. The fact that nobody's got any time to do a review of those kind of like pull requests or anything, so the fact that nothing is actually reaching the customer, there is no working software in the hands of the customer, that kind of, hold on, that doesn't really make sense. What Goldratt was trying to say was that, we should think about software, branches, pull requests, a lot of that kind of thing as inventory. And we want to minimize inventory. We want to focus on getting a feature in and into the customer's hands, one of the initial DORA metrics. So he talks a lot about flow. There's a particular moment in there, and although he's talking about physical machinery, he talks about this idea that it might be more valuable for a machine to sit idle for 10 minutes because it could pick up higher priority work than basically rushing into starting something else and ultimately generating inventory. That's kind of like quite a mindset. It's when you're dealing with people, we're a bit more interruptible than physical kind of machines. But that idea of making yourself available to other people in the team and breaking your stuff down is a key part to what helps get that stuff through the pipeline, delivery pipeline, and out to the other end. So there's a guy who he did a talk later at Agile at the Agile Cambridge conference. Dragan Stepanovic, I really hope I can pronounce his name right. And he decided to he did some analysis around kind of the pull request model. And he sort of thought about, he looked at kind of like the handovers. You have this, I write some code and I throw it in, and then sometime later somebody reviews it, and then they have some comments sometime after that, and then those comments get addressed and going backwards and forwards. And obviously it creates a lot of handovers, a lot of blocks. So he said, well, what if we apply like a limits theorem to it? What if we kind of like think about it in terms of what would it take to kind of minimize some of these things? And so he said, if you look at it from that perspective and you try and shrink all these blockers, what you end up with is, if the person who's reviewing your code is sat next to you while you're writing it, that review happens instantaneously, as does any changes, as does the feedback. And there's a consequence. And then when you get to the end of it, the code is reviewed by the other person who's with you. It can then go, you don't need a pull request. It then goes straight into master and then like through your pipeline and out the door. So that idea of minimizing those handovers to milliseconds, what does that look like? That looks like pairing or group programming, in fact. So yeah, again, that was kind of he did some analysis over a bunch of projects and came up with some good statistics. So he's done some real maths rather than me, who just talks about anecdotes. Cool. So that's kind of the productivity side of it. Let's look at collaboration in a kind of like a deeper, take that into a sort of a deeper thing. So, why do we talk to other people within our team? What is it we're kind of trying to do? We're trying to, share knowledge with them and kind of other things that we kind of know. And the reason we do that is because we're trying to manage complexity within the code base and the teams, and hopefully we have a kind of a shared vision of what we're trying to produce. So this is a book, quote from a book that was written by Jerry Weinberg. It was published just after I was born, but I guess he probably wrote it before I was probably born. And given my grey hair, it makes it a really old book. So this is he basically says, if asked, most programmers would probably say they preferred to work alone in a place where they wouldn't be disturbed by other people. He talks a bit more and then he says, the ideas expressed in the preceding paragraph are possibly the most formidable barrier to improved programming that we shall encounter. So right back in the 1970s, people like Jerry Weinberg had already realised or had already identified the fact that people basically squirreled away in their own kind of offices and not talking to each other was a significant problem to software delivery. And he kind of, this idea of people kind of letting go and helping other people out and not kind of squirreling away by themselves, he ended up turning as kind of egoless programming and tried to generate kind of more of a movement of we think more holistically about the team and less kind of about sort of ourselves. This is my favourite hot take on meetings, which he said, meetings are a complete distraction. Without them, I could work without interruption on solving the wrong problems. And, he's not basically, there are some people who suffer incredibly tedious status meetings and stuff. He's not kind of talking about that. What he was trying to get at, though, is this idea about like collaboration. And actually, there's the idea that talking to other people and collaborating is the work. The coding bit, that's important, but ultimately solving the right problems is the thing. And in fact, the studies from Capers-Jones and going back will tell you that the reason things fail is not because we didn't manage to write decent C++ code or we didn't manage to write code. It's probably because we didn't solve the right problem. We either tried to solve problems we shouldn't really have had, but ultimately, as Alan Kelly says, we spent more time building the wrong thing. And building the wrong thing is more likely to screw us up than building the thing in the wrong way. So it's okay that we kind of talk to people and make sure that actually we understand what it is we're trying to build, what problems we're trying to solve, and how we deal with that. Because maybe sometimes they don't involve any code whatsoever, which is even better. So this is kind of like my at the end of this is welcome to my TED Talk. So these are some classic aphorisms around people working in groups. Two heads are better than one. Many hands make light work. Wisdom of crowds. Rising tide lifts all boats. And a problem shared is a problem halved. I don't know whether maybe there's some people in here who disagree that these are the good kind of aphorisms, but I think in general, humankind over a very long period of time has generally come to consensus that these kind of have stuck probably because they're true. So if you kind of think they're true, why wouldn't you think about collaborating closer and maybe pairing or ensemble programming? because, wisdom of philosophers. We know that Newton has this lovely thing about each aphorism has an equal and opposite. Re-aphorism, is that a real thing? I don't know. Anyway, the point is that people say, but too many cooks spoil the broth. Well, okay, we'll come to that one. And then the other one is which people like to quote, is jack of all trades, master of none. And I put the ellipsis there because a lot of people miss off the sentence that comes after that, which is oftentimes better than master of one. This idea that kind of, it's okay to be kind of T-shaped people. Maybe you do have people who are deep and experts in particular areas, but it's okay that other people kind of, have a broad kind of level of experience. But coming back to that first one, too many cooks. The reason why too many cooks spoil the broth is because they will have their own interpretation of what it is they're trying to cook. They've all got their own idea. Oh, it needs to be like this. It needs to be a little bit salty, a little bit spicy. They're not cooks who are working on kind of a broth that they're trying to share. They're not. The phrase comes from people who are trying to put their own input without talking to the other chefs to try and understand what is the kind of broth that you're after. You're after something a little bit savoury, a little bit salty. It's not. It's people basically dipping in and doing their own thing, and as a consequence of that, obviously. So, if you let people go wild and you let some people throw tabs in and some people throw spaces in and some people put their brackets on one line and just completely ignore any naming conventions or use IF stream or whatever the old streams are, that kind of stuff, then you are going to end up with a really sport broth, or in this case, a really nasty looking code base. And it's going to be pretty horrendous. So yes, too many cooks, it's about the way those cooks interact. That's the thing that matters. So pair program kind of came about, and then there's a chap called Woody Zull, and he kind of said, well, look, if 2 heads is better than 1, what about 3 heads? And then, well, about 4 heads or 5 heads. So, could we keep going? Does this thing scale up? So, borrowing from good old Spinal Tap, what if I had 11 heads? So he sort of started to do some kind of investigations into this idea of actually what if the whole team kind of worked on one task? This is crazy stuff, putting the extreme into extreme programming. And he's done, a lot of research with teams and stuff around that, and come up with some good stuff around teams that actually do work. Maybe they don't work the whole team the whole time, but sometimes they might sort of free-flowing mobs and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of evolved a bit, but the idea was actually, is there times when the whole team kind of matters, or when that actually makes a sort of a difference? And so, from my kind of own experience, yes, this ability to kind of share your understanding with kind of other teams, particularly kind of architecture level. So I should step further back from that. Things you need to share with the rest of your team. Are we solving the right problem? Have we understood what the customers asked us to do? Do we know what it is we're probably generally trying to solve? So that's kind of a key part, and various stakeholders, whether that should be customers, but also operations teams and other stakeholders are commonly more forgotten. So that's sort of one aspect. Then there's kind of architecture. Does everybody understand kind of the general system architecture, the metaphors, that kind of thing? And then as you start to kind of move down within the stack or within the sort of the model, you start talking about kind of design principles, maybe those smaller kind of decisions. Couple of things that kind of I've had faced in the past is quite early on. The optional type was mentioned by Joseph in his talk. There was no support for that kind of in C# until quite recently. But F# had it from the beginning, had this idea of an option type. We ended up pulling that into the C# code base and using that to try and be explicit about the way that the difference between sort of reference types, nullable reference types. Similarly, domain types is kind of a thing which is a really good way to kind of keep your code base kind of under control, rather than having everything passing 87 strings as arguments, or using proper ID types rather than integers, because you don't need arithmetic. Those kind of things are idioms which are often new to various teams and code bases. Trying to share those kind of things. And sharing those things kind of early on is a good thing, because people will just go, why have you done this? And it's not just a 30-second answer necessarily. So there's a lot of kind of like designs, idioms. There might be people who are writing C++. I would still write C++ like C++98. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as auto-pointer, but, you know, it's been a long time since I've done it. I don't know what the kind of modern stuff is. So, you know, people kind of making sure that when you look at code, this is old stuff from 20 years ago. This is kind of new stuff. How the thing was. All these things need to be factored in continuously within stuff that you're kind of like writing. So sharing of that kind of knowledge is really important. And related to that, this idea of ownership. So if we go back to Weinberg, he talks about egoless programming. When people have like their own little bits of code to work on, these turn into these little kind of like fiefdoms. And that's one kind of part of it, is the fact that then all changes have to go through that one person, which is like really awkward when they're on holiday and actually it needs to be fixed today. Or maybe that person, unfortunately, has fallen under a bus and now somebody's got to pick it up. But so one of the things about kind of working in kind of groups, pairs and groups, is this idea that everybody can touch every bit of code because everybody can go everywhere. Things just can kind of get done. And that kind of like reduces the idea of, and there might be special bits of code that certain people are better placed to deal with. But the point is the vast majority of stuff should be open to everybody. And everybody should be able to contribute to it. There should be no specific kind of gates unless there's, particular. So Eric Raymond, for instance, in Cathedral and Bazaar, if you've ever read that, he talks about this idea that one of the reasons why open source has been so successful is the idea that it's not territorial. There are not people who have created errors. Basically, anybody can contribute to anything and generally accepted. Now, there are definitely people in the open source community who probably wouldn't accept anything, and we all know who I'm talking about. But although they've mellowed a lot over the years, but ultimately, that idea that open source is non-territorial, people can just contribute and stuff helps. So sharing and working together breaks down those barriers and allows people to feel comfortable dealing with kind of whatever. Or they can even have a go, but then they can pull somebody in to help them with it. That should be equally acceptable. And then the other thing is there's another thing which is around kind of like tooling and support. I don't know anybody else, but like VS Code is the number of extensions there are, the number of keybinds on here. There's a whole load of stuff about tools and things we use and different shells and and trying to keep up to date with all that and really read the release notes for everything that you ever touch is just never going to happen. So one of the good things about working with kind of other people is this idea of you get to see how other people work, and people always do things in a slightly different way. And sometimes that's like, hey, do you realize you're doing it that way? But more often than not, it's like, how did you do that? And they'll be like, what did you just push? And they'll be like, well, I just did thingy. And you go, yeah, but what did so that's a really good way to learn about like tools, or when you see people potentially pushing the paste button and you kind of go, well, maybe try Control V, or and so productivity gains kind of come from sort of tools, potentially around shells. It's like using kind of like something which is certain commands or tools or things which are kind of good, but actually could be better. Again, sitting with people and being open to people suggesting the way that you're kind of working and feeling comfortable with doing that is a great way of them teaching you how to do things. In fact, I would say that one of the good things about working with younger people or kind of more junior people, people who are newer to it, they're not encumbered by like crazy stuff that we used to do and habits that probably we still do, but actually shouldn't be doing. And so, they're a good kind of like source of, actually, you do that way now kind of thing. So they're a good way of, they tend to have learnt, well, hopefully most of the time they've learnt the good things, the modern ways, and they're not sort of still remembering how things were done before, which is a good thing to do. And then that gives them a nice way of them feeling comfortable dealing with somebody who's probably a bit older, because it's like, oh, great, I didn't know that. And you're appreciative of it, and they feel that they've contributed to things. And the last one is it's fun working in groups. Now, I always say that the fact that I'm stood up on a stage talking to a bunch of people, of which I only know at least a few of you, probably puts me in the kind of like the category of more extrovert than most people. So I would say that maybe I enjoyed sitting with other people. I don't enjoy sitting next to people who've had garlic the day before or really spicy food. But as a general sort of thing, that kind of sociability of programming, I've certainly found, and the teams that I've worked in have enjoyed it, have definitely had a lot more fun kind of doing it as a team and learning more about each other and kind of habits and outside things. That doesn't mean that we spend our entire time chatting about what we did last night, what film we went to see, but just, there are moments where, you kind of get to kind of learn things about people and, discover a bit more. And that's good because that just, makes people feel more comfortable about what they're doing. Mob programming. Actually, it turns out that in certain cultures, the term mobbing actually does have quite bad, serious connotations. And we should really be looking to use the term ensemble programming. And I try really hard to say that more often, but occasionally I slip into old habits. But this is what they're alluding to when some people talk about mobbing. So, have we enough time? Okay. When is it good? When is bringing an entire team to work on one task a good kind of time to do it? And I would say it's about when you're dealing with really big features. Oronani talks about design work being split into the idea of concepts and features. There's like concepts, these pillars, these things that a lot of stuff are built on. Those are the things that generally the whole team needs to understand the design, the rationale for those things. Features, they're just kind of like piecing together the concepts in certain ways with little bits. So concepts, epics, if you like, we're discussing kind of epics within a sort of agile framework. Understanding those things are things that generate the whole team. Specific kind of examples, working in with a NoSQL document-oriented database where you have no locking. The only atomic rights are to a single document. If you have to spill over into multiple documents, things start getting tricky. So if you don't write that kind of code in the right way, anybody in the team, you might end up corrupting data in the database. And that's generally quite bad, particularly when you work for a company that has reputational risk. If you're working in a startup and you don't have any customers, it doesn't matter what you do. But like if you're working for a company with millions of customers, then losing their loyalty points is quite serious. So that's one particular scenario where we sat down, we whiteboarded stuff as a team, but then also we sat down and we worked out. We said, how do we want to represent this concept of a document? How do you want to deal with retries and what kind of scenarios are the things where we might need to retry? When do we need to identify when, cluster's got a bit out of step, panic, or that kind of thing. And do we want to do that as classes? Do we want to use the old unit of work pattern from, design patterns days? Or do we just want to write an extension method and 3 lines of code? Those kind of things. And then at the end of that exercise, everybody goes, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And I generally know. And so that's a kind of good opportunity. Security, adding kind of like security kind of into APIs, understanding what kind of model you might want to use around stuff. It's another good thing. Kind of getting security right is pretty important. So probably useful if everybody understands what you're going for rather than just sort of letting somebody hack something in. That's where it will go wrong. Other things, times we've done kind of whole team stuff is putting together a build pipeline when you're kind of putting together a new project and you're getting the walking skeleton up. Decisions about tooling is always tricky. Some people have good experiences or bad experiences, factoring that kind of in. For instance, in one place it was like, what do we want to do for build? Do we want to use make or do we want to use gulp? And everybody's, ugh. And there's like, what about Pisarchy? Because we like doing a lot of PowerShell and actually it's quite performant and it's quite, it's well supported. So we end up bringing something in. Some of us are comfortable with, some of us are like, okay, maybe not sold in it, but you're kind of bringing that in. So particularly a lot of the tooling, because when it comes to kind of debugging and dealing with stuff, how you kind of structure your code and build and deploy pipeline, will matter in terms of the mean time to recovery part of it. How quickly can you debug it and then work out what the fix is? So kind of like tooling thing, what are people comfortable with? That's another really good kind of area to do stuff. So whole team, great, but actually you kind of don't need it for once you've kind of got those pillars kind of worked out. I would say that pairing for kind of production code from that point onwards has worked kind of really good. Breaking it down, 2 people is generally enough. You've got a person, particularly you've got that second person to kind of keep you honest, kind of like keep you focused. They'll stay on target. It's good. You also don't disappear off and go, yeah, that'd be really cool if I just did. No, don't do that. Just kind of, let's solve the problem we actually need to do at hand now. But actually, maybe there is a good reason why you do something. So you've got somebody to negotiate with, but that negotiation happens like now. So you kind of decide whether that's sensible. And you've got somebody, you move on. It's not like go and wander off, put it in, put it on the backlog, get it done. So having somebody there, at least one other person with you at a time, ensures that code's reviewed, ideas reviewed, things generally stay focused, and that's done. So that's kind of a good I think there's a general rule. There are times, I'll kind of come to that. So pairing is a sort of a general thing, found very useful for keeping so. But obviously, not everything. I don't need people. We don't, as a group, all have to check my inbox. We all have our own Slack channels. Maybe there's other conversations. There's tedious stuff you might have to do, like booking some other meetings or doing stuff. So there is stuff that we can do by ourselves. But outside of the administration, I think kind of that education and learning side of it, in terms of being able to go off and do something and explore something is important to do. But potentially as a person, we like to solve problems by ourselves. We are individuals. We're not just part of like a big kind of machine. And maybe we have ideas and we'd like to explore them. And we should have time to do that. Now, when it comes to turning that into some production code, that's the point at which you'd go back into a pair and go, right, go to have this idea. Or maybe even go into the whole team and go, we did that thing the other day. That's like a bit kind of rubbish. And actually, I've thought about it a bit more and I'd like to explore this. And maybe you bring everybody back in. So that's the time at which, in terms of things you're going to commit, bigger kind of group. But you can definitely do lots of stuff kind of by yourself. There's individual stuff. And that's kind of like the key thing is this idea of like teams kind of like flowing and ebbing between like, working in groups and big groups and small groups, and then maybe flowing in and out. Morning stand-ups. Some people have stand-ups in the afternoon. One of the reasons why I've tended to pick, if you have a stand-up, kind of first thing in the morning, you're reprioritising the backlog, have a look, what do we want to solve today? A really good opportunity then to basically say, oh, actually, there's this thing here that we think, we're all in the office, great, or we're all kind of together. Maybe we should all work on that one thing this morning, and then maybe in the afternoon we'll kind of like split up. Or maybe it's like, I worked with so-and-so yesterday, I'm going to work with this person today, and we'll carry on this thing. So at least there's some continuity, one half of the pair, other people come in. But that idea that kind of, team sizes kind of like change. Sometimes you might have multiple days kind of within a group, but ultimately you can kind of mix and match kind of things. But basically it's about coordinating your time, and the start of the day is generally a really good kind of idea. It is really intense, so, plenty of breaks. Another good thing though, when you're working in kind of groups, is that people tend not to interrupt you. People might interrupt one person. When two people are sat together and they're focused, people are far more nervous about interrupting you. And if you're in a kind of a conference room where you've got like a projector and the keyboard and you set that, they definitely won't kind of interrupt you at all. So we used kind of like tended to use the conference rooms and projectors and sitting together as a very much kind of go away. I'll deal. We all break in an hour, 2 hours, or whatever. People generally would know when we were available. So really focused time. I should have done it. Kind of mentioned tooling. Things are a lot easier these days. VS Code Live Share allows you to. So one of the original problems you had was that you'd have one keyboard. Somebody would have a laptop with Emacs, or maybe you're a VIA person, and I mean, assuming you could actually get within the same space, that you didn't repel each other, that's kind of hard. Or maybe it's like somebody's plunked a Mac keyboard in front of you and you're a Windows person. And I still use Visual C 2 bindings from 1990s because they're ingrained in my head. That would really annoy the hell out of somebody, and they delete the code rather than entering the debug or whatever. So they were all kind of like issues. Now with things like VS Code and separate machines, people, you can have your own key bindings, and it's like Google Docs where you move the cursor around, people can type. But I think generally people are a little bit more chilled about. I think things have generally, even one thing you can mostly get away with typing stuff without doing stuff. You can type some stuff in on anybody's keyboard. Maybe you can't like debug and do a whole load of really fancy stuff, but mostly it's like if you have an idea, you just type, and you can. It doesn't have to compile. It's just, what does the shape of this thing look like? That kind of thing. But that's good tooling. Projector's really nice for kind of big screens. Even remote, having like a Zoom or a WebEx or a, heaven forbid, Teams or whatever, having that call open, even if you're all remote, and having that on and then being able to screen share is perfectly kind of like doable, especially if you've got something like live share kind of under the covers, so you can sort of see faces and talk. So generally kind of like working. One project we had, the 6 of us were remote, and we just all had a team call open the entire day and people just come and go, and like look, you could see whether somebody was their keyboard or whatever. Nobody felt bad about going out walking the dog, whatever. That kind of things, it's just part of the way things kind of are. And when they come back, you kind of talk. Unless they've got a cherry keyboard, then you have to mute them because they're too noisy. There are sometimes it can be a bit awkward with some things, but that's an unsolved problem, I think, isn't it? The ability to hopefully we will get it solved. Final point about literature. This book was written in the early 2000s. It's actually quite hard to come by now. Not overly cheap, but it is worthwhile because it looks at the studies that were done by Alistair Cockburn and some other people again, they were doing various exercises with people to show kind of the effects of it. One of the other really good things that the book kind of goes into is the idea of how you kind of pair people up, maybe. So, for instance, this idea of like, is it a junior and a junior, or a junior and a senior, or does it work with two seniors? And they got some good guidance around whether those things work. Short thing is that two juniors together generally doesn't work because neither of them know what they're doing and they just end up like floundering around. So, like, that kind of generally doesn't work. Senior, so two seniors as working together. I've certainly people I've kind of worked with who have been doing this for 20, 30 years, like myself. If they're kind of into that, they're equally good. There's no, the whole egoless thing is just like, yeah, great, just whatever comes out of it will be great. I always say there's some guy who infuriates me no end with his questions and the way that we work, but he's a person I would always want to pair with because he's a person who infuriates me because he challenges my assumptions and the way that things are, and the whole is always greater than the sum of our two knowledge. So that's like a good thing. So there's some good stuff in there. The research, actually, if you Google it as a PDF, you can find the original research that went into the book, and that is free, as far as I'm aware. So you can kind of get a lot of the content of the book in kind of other ways, but it's good. But it is quite old. There is another book called Software Teams or Software Teaming, which is a more recent book that I had completely forgotten about and haven't put on the slide, which is to take more about look at ensemble programming by Woody Zoll, which is well worth kind of looking at as a more. So this was written kind of 20 years ago, so it didn't really cover bigger groups, but that does. That's it. I don't have a book though to sell. Most of the content of this I wrote up in Overload in 2018. I did a big piece about it. I'd been doing it for 4 or 5 years at that time in various teams. So if you so it's kind of on the internet. So a lot of the content and stuff is kind of in there. That's it basically. I think we won't get told off. That's it. Done.
We could afford a few questions. Anyone?
It's been me and beer, and I mean, I appreciate that. That's really a no-brainer. But
have you done any experiments or any thoughts about pair program the large language? Something I've started doing.
So the question was about pairing with a large language. Do you mean in terms of the language model instead of the pair, or okay? Yes. Okay, so that's not what a large language model. A person is not there to check that you can type or to write your code. So a large language model would help a pair. The pair is there to help you think about the actual problem that needs solving. Almost like, what would you prompt for? What do you ask? How does this problem need solving? Who do we need to talk to? So coding is a tiny part of software delivery. It's all the other stuff, and that's the stuff like, understanding what people want to do, how do you do this, and talking to stakeholders, and how do we, operationally, how do we support this? It's not going to tell you any of that kind of stuff. And those are the things that you and a pair would, and the person who's with you or the group would deal with. But definitely for maybe parts of the code thing, if you're kind of not used to stuff, then asking a question, using that for getting you is probably a good thing. I've only done it very lightly in that kind of way, so I don't have a huge amount of fun experience. But I've definitely found it useful for things I'm not familiar with, like, Python stuff. I don't know a lot of Python, TypeScript, so it's great to help get up. So I guess if two of you, we did a thing here, TDD session here, and then there was somebody with you and hadn't done a lot of Go, and we kind of both wanted to learn it. So we ended up, we talked about the problem, but we used the model to kind of help us get the Go syntax bits. And then we go, oh yeah, actually. Yeah. So yeah, I think, yes, sir.
Thank you very much for the talk, Chris. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to say I personally resonated very much about what you said with how working with someone in a pair, like even though he infuriates you, you end up liking the fact that you work with him because he challenges you. And I personally resonate with that. I have a couple of co-workers with whom my relationship is exactly as you described. But I noticed, for me, maybe I'm like that and I can deal with it. For a lot of people, this sort of friction and challenges, it spills outside of like this work environment. It becomes almost like a personal hatred between, like character difference, etc., or you just hate working with a person. So you wouldn't pick like working in pairs again, or like working in pairs could produce this effect. Do you have any sort of tips that, like, for making pair programming work smoother for this view?
Yes, I guess the question is about, I guess, conflicts between people with different opinions and how you might kind of maybe get a meeting of minds. So there are definitely some people who are not into it, and I'd never want to push anybody into it. If it's something we've done, it's something that people have to come to. There's an old story, there's an old tale about stone soup, where there's like a bunch of people and they have nothing and they bring some stones and they put it in the water. And then some villagers come out and they say, oh, what are you doing? And they say, oh, we're making stone soup. And they're kind of going, oh, it's a bit bland. I've got some salt. Can I add some salt? And they add it. And then some other villagers come out and go, what are you doing? And then they go, oh, maybe if you added a carrot, it'd be a bit nicer. So this parable is obviously about kind of building, sort of a team, or building sort of bridges between people who are naturally kind of reserved. So, I guess there is sort of people have to. I feel that people have to come to it because they kind of want to see what's going on, maybe, and they're kind of enjoy it. There's definitely times where we got a bit heated, and some people felt really uncomfortable because they thought that we were antagonistic, and we kind of definitely had to kind of rein it in a bit, or actually just be mentioned that, hey, that's all right, we're not, we're just disagreeing, but it's okay. So yeah, we have to be a bit careful about putting people off by being overly kind of appearing to be aggressive, but maybe that's just the banter between you. So definitely how you behave kind of in the office and stuff can be a deal. But yeah, just maybe just sort of trying bits and just feeding people in, trying to make people comfortable is the main thing, so that you genuinely want to solicit their contribution. What do you think about this thing? And generally trying to listen to them generally makes people basically feel kind of like, valued, and that's it. And then hopefully you can kind of maybe get a little bit more out of it, maybe try a little bit at first. And maybe the way you act with that pair would be different to somebody who does. Or maybe you just need to rein in the conversations with other people so that they work. But yeah, it's nothing foolproof, but generally trying to make people feel wanted and valued is a big thing. But there are definitely some people who just won't be into it, and it's like, just leave me alone, and that's fine. And so we did a whole mob and one person was excluded, and I felt bad every time, but they made it very clear every time they weren't kind of interested in it, and they kind of did their own thing, and the rest of us kind of did some stuff. And maybe a year later they would have been into it, but certainly for that 6 months it was not their thing. Thank you.